Roy Rogers started humbly enough once he arrived in Los Angeles, playing music with small groups and eventually forming the Sons of the Pioneers, whose harmonies defined cowboy music for a whole generation. As he inched toward Hollywood, that little farm boy from Ohio never quite left him. And so, when the studios began to place him in B-movie westerns, and the audiences fell in love with his gentle smile and easy saddle posture, Roy Rogers, no longer Leonard Sly, found himself with opportunities to shape an image that matched his childhood imagination. By the 1940s, Roy was well on his way to becoming a Western icon. His success might have tempted him to snap up a sleek Beverly Hills mansion with flamboyant pillars, a glitzy swimming pool, and night after night of star-studded parties. Instead, he found himself drawn to the high desert, to Apple Valley, a place no one else in the Hollywood fold was clamoring to claim. The property he eventually purchased was raw, wide, and open, ringed by jagged mountains that glowed pink at sunset. It spoke to his soul. No one who visited that ranch in its heyday would call it ordinary. Roy named it the Double R Bar Ranch, and it was a far cry from the modest houses of his youth. Yet it wasn't ostentatious in the Hollywood sense. Instead, it seemed like a place sculpted by warm hearts and practical minds. A single-story L-shaped ranch house sprawled across a gentle knoll designed in a style reminiscent of old Spanish missions. Stucco walls, a low-pitched tile roof, wide porches that sheltered guests from the desert sun. Roy had insisted on a layout that allowed each of the children's rooms to open onto a shaded courtyard filled with potted geraniums, and at least one sagging bench that somehow always held a sleeping cat. From the outside, it looked surprisingly unassuming. A cowboy star's retreat, yes, but primarily a family's nest. Through the heavy wooden front door, though, visitors immediately saw Roy's personal touches. In the living room, vaulted ceilings were supported by rough-hewn beams that seemed as though they might have been lifted right out of a vintage Western film set. They had that kind of time-worn aura. Each beam had notches and marks, a testament, rumor had it, to Roy's obsession with authenticity. He'd personally scoured salvage yards and older ranches to find real wood, older than any he could buy new. So, while the westerns in which he acted often used cardboard facades and painted backdrops, Roy's own living room was the genuine article, a place where people could share stories under timber that might have been standing in the desert for decades. And near the big stone fireplace, which was wide enough to roast a small hog should the mood strike, Roy placed carefully chosen pieces of taxidermy. A jackalope, rumored to be a gift from a friend with a sense of humor, sat next to a regal, fully antlered buck that Roy claimed had once roamed the property. Visitors would flock to that fireplace on cold winter nights. When the wind whipped across the desert, the living room glowed with lamplight, and the crackle of a steady fire merged with the easy talk of family and friends. Roy's children would gather around his feet, and he'd play them old cowboy ballads on his guitar, his voice quiet, tender, fatherly. If the living room was the heart of the house, the kitchen was its lifeblood. At first glance, it had the checkered tile floors and homely furniture of many mid-century American kitchens. But there were subtle eccentricities. The counters were slightly lower than average, a legacy from the early days when Roy's first wife, Arlene, who passed away tragically not long after giving birth to their daughter, wanted a kitchen that would be easier to manage while carrying a baby on her hip. Later, Dale Evans, Roy's beloved partner for the rest of his life, honored that design choice, finding it both practical and emotionally significant. There was also the matter of the funny funnel, an old tin funnel that hung next to the spice rack. Dale used to say it was for capturing the angel's laughter whenever something went hilariously wrong, like the time Roy tried to bake a cornbread for the kids and ended up with something that resembled a brick. The funnel was never actually used for anything, but it became a symbol of comedic relief in a home that always seemed to have one too many kids or grandkids rummaging through the pantry. To the children themselves, the ranch was an endless adventure. Roy and Dale famously adopted several children, in addition to their biological kids, forging a warm, rowdy, and sometimes chaotic household that included up to 9 children running in and out at any given time. A day at the ranch often meant chores first: feeding the animals, brushing down the horses, checking the fences. After that, the kids might tear around the backyard on bicycles or attempt to rope the practice steer dummy Roy had set up near the stables. Roy constructed a small fort in the corner of the property so that the children could play frontier games. The fort came complete with a watchtower, a few dusty crates, and a random set of old wagon wheels that probably once served as B-movie props. Neighbors recall hearing whoops of laughter drifting across the desert wind late into the evening, especially on summer nights when no one wanted to go inside. Perhaps most important to Roy was the stable. He was, after all, the king of the Cowboys, and a cowboy without his horse is like a preacher without a pulpit. The stable itself was meticulously kept, each horse's stall labeled, each bridle hung with care, the smell of alfalfa hay and linseed oil thick in the air. Roy's prized palomino, Trigger, had a stall near the stable doors that was padded with extra straw and boasted a small nameplate: Trigger, smartest horse in the movies. Long after Trigger passed and was famously preserved, Roy kept that nameplate in the stable as a quiet shrine to the partner who had galloped alongside him in countless films. Trigger's memory was woven into the ranch's very spirit. The children might have teased each other about that old sign, but they also recognized it as a nod to their father's devotion. Rumor has it, Roy never removed Trigger's feed bucket from that stall, even after the horse was gone. A sentimental gesture, maybe, but that was Roy. He believed in honoring the animals and people who shaped his life story. Not far from the stable, there was a corrugated metal shed that some visitors took to calling the secret hideaway, though in truth, it was more of a workspace than a clandestine lair. Roy used to tinker there, fashioning small cowboy trinkets, testing guitars, and occasionally even working on what he called sound contraptions. He liked to experiment with ways to improve the sound quality of his recordings, rigging up old radio tubes, microphone stands, and battered amplifiers. If you wandered in at the right hour, you might find Roy plucking out a melody, trying to capture a unique echo effect off the tin walls. Once, apparently, he rigged a microphone in the stable to record the horse's gentle snorts at dawn. He wanted to layer them into a track for an upcoming radio show, but ultimately decided it was too folksy. That tape might still be out there in some collector's vault, or maybe lost to time. As his celebrity soared, Roy found the Apple Valley Ranch an increasingly vital refuge. This was the place where fans rarely intruded, and he and Dale could host philanthropic barbecues or quiet gatherings of close friends. The ranch also had a modest guest house, a smaller stucco structure that mirrored the main house's Spanish style, albeit more compact. In the 1950s and 60s, visiting that guest house was a treat for a host of Hollywood folks who craved a respite from the city's noise. People whispered that even the famously private Gary Cooper once spent a weekend enjoying the utter stillness of the desert nights and shooting cans off fence posts with Roy at dawn. A more flamboyant story involves a young Elvis Presley allegedly dropping by unannounced in 1964, late at night, just to pay his respects to his childhood hero. Roy, ever the gentleman, supposedly served him coffee in the kitchen, while Dale rummaged for an extra bed in the guest house. Elvis left the next day with a huge grin and a promise he'd never forget the warmth he felt there. Throughout these years, Roy might have indulged in small luxuries, like a new truck or a fancier guitar, but he never poured millions into making the ranch a showpiece. He wanted it comfortable and welcoming, not pristine or regal. In fact, some longtime staff and family friends remarked that Roy was so frugal, he'd sometimes patch up the same fence 5 times rather than replace the boards entirely. Yet for all its modesty, the ranch exuded a sense of enchantment. It was at its best a swirl of children's giggles, neighing horses, sizzling steaks on the grill, guitars plunking out cowboy tunes, Dale's gentle laughter, and Roy's calm, fatherly presence at the center of it all. People would drive by on the main road, catching glimpses of a tall cowboy in a checkered shirt strolling among the corrals, or a group of children chasing each other with water balloons. Those passers-by would grin, thinking, that's the great Roy Rogers, living out his American dream with an authenticity you couldn't fake if you tried. As Roy's fame climbed to stratospheric heights, radio shows, TV appearances, and that iconic role as the heroic singing cowboy, he did spend some time in a modest house near Hollywood for convenience. But that place served a purely functional purpose. It was a simple ranch-style home in the valley where Roy and Dale could crash between filming days without having to endure the hours-long drive to Apple Valley every night. If you walked in expecting star-studded glitz, you'd be disappointed. The living room was filled with floral couches that dated back to the 1950s. The kitchen had peeling linoleum, and the backyard was barely large enough for a folding chair, let alone a horse. Roy used to joke that the Hollywood pad was nothing more than a bunkhouse with better plumbing. The real gem, he'd always say, was waiting in the desert. That's where the heart sang. Yet for all the ranch's sense of harmony, life wasn't always easy. Roy and Dale faced heartbreak more than once, losing children to illness and accidents. Every time tragedy struck, they seemed to cling more fiercely to the ranch as a place of healing. Dale in particular found strength walking among the cacti in the early morning hours, praying silently. She would come back with tears still fresh on her face, but a renewed determination to keep the family glued together. After the death of their daughter Robin, who was born with Down syndrome, Roy built a small prayer garden near the property's edge. A simple wooden cross, a few benches, and desert flowers that Dale painstakingly planted surrounded a private space for contemplation. Family members said Roy never missed a day visiting that garden during the hardest months, often softly singing happy trails as though it were a hymn. As the years drifted on, one of the ranch's hidden quirks emerged. A small root cellar beneath the kitchen floor, accessible via a trap door next to the pantry. It wasn't exactly a secret room, but it was easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. Initially, Roy used it as a cool storage for perishables, milk, eggs, and produce. Over time, Dale turned part of it into a personal archive, storing scrapbooks, fan letters, and even the kids' old hand-drawn birthday cards. She called it our memory vault. Sometimes if you were rummaging through the pantry at night, you'd hear soft giggles and see a flicker of light from beneath the floor. Dale might be down there, flipping through old photographs with tears in her eyes, or rummaging through boxes of souvenirs, each with its own vivid tale of triumph or heartache. It wasn't a sensational secret vault filled with treasure. It was more precious than that, containing the echoes of a family's shared life. In time, Roy and Dale established the Roy Rogers and Dale Evans Museum nearby, which displayed many of the couple's mementos, including the beloved trigger and the dog bullet. The museum became a mecca for fans who wanted a tangible piece of that old-time Western magic. Though it drew tourists from all over, Roy's real sanctuary remained the ranch, more private, more intimate, and, to his mind, more real. The museum was about celebrating a public persona, a cultural icon. The ranch was about honoring the man behind the legend, the father, the husband, the quiet dreamer who once yearned to sleep beneath the stars. Over the decades, the Apple Valley Ranch grew older and more worn, and so did Roy and Dale. By the late 1980s and into the 90s, they spent less time there, often traveling or staying closer to medical facilities as age took its toll. The children had all grown, many with families of their own. The ranch gradually fell into a kind of gentle disrepair. Fences sagged, desert sand drifted into once lively courtyards, and the stable rang hollow. Roy still visited when he could, though, pressing a palm against the old beams in the living room and commenting on how they'd held up nicely. He'd grumble quietly about the weeds in the yard, and you might see a faint sadness pass across his face as he thought of better times. Roy passed away in 1998, leaving behind not just a Hollywood legacy but also a sense that a fundamental piece of Americana had vanished. Dale continued on for a time, but without Roy's presence, the ranch's heartbeat seemed to fade. Eventually, the property was sold, changed hands, and fell into a complicated swirl of uncertain ownership and sporadic attempts to revitalize it. For a while, it stood empty, with rumors swirling about structural damage, vandalism, or even restless spirits. One caretaker insisted he once heard faint guitar strumming near the stable at midnight, only to discover the stable completely empty. Tall tales or not, the ranch gained a reputation as a dusty relic of a simpler era, silently crumbling under the Mojave sun. Today, if you dare to pass through the rusted gates, you can still make out the bones of what once was. The courtyard fountain is cracked and dry, its tiles chipping away. The geraniums that once brightened the walkway are long dead, replaced by spiny desert bushes and drifting tumbleweeds. A battered old sign reading Double R Bar Ranch hangs crookedly from a post near the entrance. The main house's stucco walls bear the scars of time, flaking paint, cracks, graffiti. Windows are boarded up and the once gleaming tile roof has caved in places. Inside you'll find ghosts of that vibrant past. The living room's beams stand resolute, though they're pockmarked with age. Echoes of footfalls in dusty corridors bring fleeting memories. The patter of children's feet, the soft hush of Roy's guitar, the contagious giggle of Dale. Torn wallpaper reveals bits of old newspaper used for insulation. Some pages with half-legible stories about Roy's Hollywood premieres. For those who have ventured onto the property in recent years, urban explorers, curious fans, even passers-by, there's a shared sentiment. An odd hush drapes itself over every inch, as though the land itself is holding its breath. Sometimes an old advertisement for Roy's movies is found pinned to a battered door. Other times, a child's toy or a scrap of sheet music surfaces in the rubble. These bits and pieces paint a portrait of a life once so vibrant that it's hard to believe it's gone. Visitors leave feeling a curious mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the emptiness that lingers. Gratitude for the memories that still echo in those desert breezes. If you stand at the edge of the old prayer garden, you'll see the warped remains of the wooden cross that Roy and Dale once knelt before in times of heartbreak and hope. The desert vegetation has crept in, and the wooden benches are toppled, but the spirit of that garden still seems to linger like a gentle hush. There, you can imagine Roy kneeling, hat in hand, perhaps humming a hymn or praying for strength. Some say that's where you can feel him most strongly, almost as if you could hear his voice whisper, "I never expected it would all end up like this, partner, but life on this earth is always a temporary trail." And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, Let us know your thoughts in the comments section and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.